Get your headphones ready. This next story is intense.
Silence is the only weapon that never runs out of ammunition. For 3 years, I've raised my daughters in the shadows of other people's lives, teaching them that being invisible is the same as being alive. But as the heavy steel doors of Lee Dae-Kwan's office groaned open, I realized our sanctuary was about to become a slaughterhouse. The penthouse office of the Iron Shadow was a cathedral of glass and cold ambition. It spanned the entire top floor, a cavernous space of polished dark oak and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the flickering neon nerves of Seoul. To my left stood the massive mahogany desk, a fortress within a fortress. To my right, the heavy charcoal velvet curtains where I now stood paralyzed, my fingers white-knuckled around a canister of industrial ammonia. I knew this room better than the men who guarded it. As I stood in the dark, my eyes drifted to the corner of the ceiling. The secondary infrared sensor was blinking a dull, rhythmic red. 3 weeks ago, I had noticed the mounting bracket was loose, creating a 3-degree blind spot that could hide a grown man. I'd secretly tightened it, not for Dae-Kwan's sake, but because any vulnerability in his security was a vulnerability for my girls. They were right there, less than 6 feet away. I could smell them, that heart-wrenching, innocent scent of lavender baby powder and warm quilts I'd tucked into the desk's knee-hole. It clashed violently with the room's dominant notes: expensive sandalwood, the ozone of the high-end servers, and now, the sharp, acidic tang of human fear. The biometric locks hissed, a sound like a guillotine falling. Lee Dae-Kwan entered. He moved with the silent, predatory grace of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. His tailored suit was the color of a bruise, and his eyes, cold, obsidian, and terrifyingly intelligent, scanned the room. Behind him, 2 guards dragged a man whose face was a map of broken capillaries and regret. "The vault logs don't lie, Jun-ho," Dae-Kwan said. His voice was a low, resonant vibration that I felt in my teeth. "Only 3 people have the encryption key. 1 is dead. 1 is me." The guard on the right, Jun-ho, didn't tremble. That was the first red flag. I watched him from the sliver of space between the curtains. I noticed the way his hand hovered, not over the prisoner but near the side draw of his holstered weapon. He was positioning himself just outside the primary camera's arc, a flaw he thought existed, unaware I had recalibrated the lens a week prior. "I have nothing to say, boss," Jun-ho replied. His voice was too calm. In a heartbeat, the atmosphere shifted from an interrogation to an execution. Jun-ho didn't pull his gun on the prisoner. He whirled, the barrel of his suppressed pistol rising toward the back of Dae-Kwan's head. I didn't think about the risk. I didn't think about my ghost status. I only thought about the stray bullet that could pass through a human skull and find its way into the mahogany desk where my heart was sleeping. I lunged. I cleared the distance between the curtain and the men in 3 explosive strides. My boots made no sound on the silk rug. Just as Jun-ho's finger tightened on the trigger, I slammed the nozzle of the industrial ammonia stripper directly into his face and squeezed. The high-pressure mist exploded in a caustic cloud, hitting his eyes and open mouth. Welcome back, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. Before we dive into the blood and shadows, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our dark romance family stretch across cities and time zones. Every click and comment helps us keep telling these high-stakes stories of survival and dangerous love. So find your quiet place, dim the lights, and let's see if Fana can protect her twins from the Iron Shadow. Let's begin. Jun-ho let out a choked, gargling scream, his hands flying to his dissolving corneas. The gun fired, a muted thwip, but the bullet went wide, shattering a crystal decanter on the far sideboard. Before he could recover, I stepped into his guard, using his own momentum to drive my elbow into his solar plexus. As he doubled over, I looped a high-tensile cleaning wire, thin as a hair but strong enough to hang a car, around his wrists, jerking them behind his back with a professional's precision. Silence reclaimed the room, heavier than before. The other guard had his weapon out, aimed at my forehead. Dae-Kwan, however, hadn't moved. He stood perfectly still, his back to me, watching the shattered crystal drip onto his floor. Then, slowly, he turned. His eyes didn't go to the traitor groveling on the floor. They fixed on me. He looked at the way I held the wire, the way my feet were braced, and the lethal coldness in my expression. "Fauna," he murmured. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. "The woman who cleans the glass so well I forget it's there." Before I could respond, a soft rustle came from beneath the desk. My heart skipped a beat. "Mama? Is the king here?" The voice was tiny, sleep thickened, and laced with a terrifying hope. Mizan crawled out from the darkness of the desk's knee-hole. She stood up, her small frame dwarfed by the massive furniture, her favorite tattered blanket draped over her shoulders. I had told them stories to survive, stories about why we hid, why we moved, and why their biological father, Lencho, was the shadow monster we had to outrun. I had promised them that one day we would find the warrior king, a man so powerful and so brave that even the shadows couldn't touch him. Mizan didn't see a mafia boss. She didn't see the blood on the floor or the weapons in the air. She saw the man I had been cleaning for. She saw the sheer, undisputed power radiating off Li Daquan like heat from a furnace. She walked toward him. Every step she took felt like a mile in my soul. The guards stayed frozen, bewildered by the sight of a beautiful brown-skinned child in a lace nightgown wandering through a crime scene. Mizan stopped at Daquan's feet. She looked up, her large, observant eyes tracking the blood splattered across his cuff. She didn't flinch. She reached out and touched his hand, the hand that had ordered a dozen deaths this week alone. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice a fragile bell in the wreckage of the room. "Did you finish the bad men? Mama said the king would come and the monsters would go away. Are you the king?" Daquan's entire posture fractured. The Iron Shadow didn't just look surprised. He looked hit. He stared down at the little girl claiming his soul, his fingers twitching as if he wanted to reach out but had forgotten how to be gentle. He looked at Mizan, then at me, the realization dawning on him that I hadn't just been cleaning his office, I had been raising a legacy under his very nose. He saw the resemblance, not to him, but to the warrior king of the stories. He saw the trust in her eyes, a commodity he hadn't possessed in a lifetime. Slowly, Daquan stepped around the child, his movements deliberate. He ignored the traitor, ignored his men, and walked straight into my personal space. The scent of sandalwood and iron overwhelmed the fading lavender. He reached out, his hand steady as a mountain, and placed his fingers under my chin. He tilted my face up, his thumb grazing the edge of my jaw with a possessive, terrifying heat. "Fanna Porter," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that promised both a sanctuary and a cage. "You've been a ghost in my house for far too long. Now, you're the only thing keeping it standing." The tension in the room was a living thing, a jagged wire stretched to the breaking point. Myun, the guard who hadn't betrayed us yet, still had his barrel leveled at my forehead. The steel felt like a cold eye staring into my soul. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heartbeat was a frantic drum against my ribs, amplified by the sudden sharp silence of the penthouse. Daquan's fingers were still on my jaw, his thumb tracing my skin with a terrifying calm. He didn't even look at Myun. He didn't need to. "Lower it," Daquan commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was a soft, lethal vibration. "Boss, she's a breach. She's been living under your desk." "Lower it," Daquan repeated, his voice dropping an octave. This time, he turned his head just a fraction, his obsidian eyes locking onto Myun's. It was the look of a god deciding whether or not to strike. Myun flinched, the tip of his weapon dipping before he finally holstered it with a trembling hand. "Take the traitor to the sub-level," Daquan ordered, his gaze returning to me. "And take the children to the sunroom. Feed them. Guard them. If a single hair is touched on their heads, I will burn soul to the ground to find the person responsible." The moment Mijun moved toward Mizan, I transformed. The cleaning lady was gone. The lioness arrived. I stepped in front of my daughter, my hands curling into claws, a low guttural growl vibrating in my throat. I didn't care about the guns. I didn't care about the iron shadow. Touch them and you die, I hissed. Daquan's hand moved from my jaw to my shoulder, his grip firm but not crushing. Fauna, look at me. I forced my eyes to his. They are safe. My men know the price of failure. You and I need to speak where the walls don't have ears. I watched, trembling, as Mjun gently guided Mizan toward the door. She looked back at me, her thumb in her mouth, her eyes wide. Saba was still tucked in the desk, being lifted out by another guard with the care one might use for unexploded ordnance. Every inch of my skin screamed to scream, to fight, to tear the room apart. But I saw the way Daquan watched them, not with malice, but with a strange clinical fascination. Move, he whispered. He led me out of the office, his hand never leaving the small of my back. We walked down a long, dimly lit corridor lined with original ink wash paintings that looked like splashes of blood on white silk. The only sound was the rhythmic click of my work boots and the heavy, expensive thud of his loafers on the marble. The air here was colder, filtered through a secondary ventilation system that hummed with a low-frequency drone of 1,000 servers. He swiped a black card against a concealed panel, and a heavy door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. This was his private sanctum, a room of dark leather, smoked glass, and a wall of monitors that flickered like a digital heartbeat. He didn't offer me a seat. He walked to a sleek obsidian table, picked up a tablet, and tapped the screen. The blue light cast sharp skeletal shadows across his high cheekbones. I spent 3 hours this morning wondering why my primary encryption gate had a new 256-bit layer I didn't authorize, he said, turning the tablet toward me, and why the biometric lag on the east elevator had been reduced by exactly 0.4 seconds. I thought I had a ghost in my machine. I didn't realize the ghost had a name. He stepped closer, his presence a physical weight pressing against me. He swiped the screen, showing a thermal playback of me, not cleaning, but rewiring a junction box near the server room 2 nights ago. You're not just a cleaning consultant, Fauna. You're a security auditor. A high-level one. You didn't just hide here. You optimized my life. He leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could smell the whiskey and the faint, bitter scent of the gunpowder he'd been around all night. Who are you running from that makes a Mafia stronghold feel like a safe house? The air in the room felt thin. I backed up until the backs of my knees hit a leather chair, but he followed, invading my space until I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. I was a digital security specialist for a private firm, I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts. I cleaned footprints for people who didn't want to be found, until I realized the man I was living with was the one people needed to be hidden from. Daquan's eyes narrowed. He tapped the tablet again, pulling up a file on Junho, the traitor I had just blinded. Junho didn't just decide to kill me for money, Fauna. He was contacted by an external asset, a man with a military-grade encryption signature, a man named Lencho. The name hit me like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt. My vision blurred for a second as the familiar cold dread of the past 3 years washed over me. Lencho, I whispered. He found me. He found a trace, Daquan corrected, his voice dropping to a seductive, dangerous purr. He reached out, his fingers brushing the pulse point on my neck. He felt the frantic, galloping beat of my heart. He was using my traitor to get to you. Which means my house is no longer a sanctuary, it's a target. I looked at him, searching for the monster, but I only found a man who looked like he had finally found a puzzle worth solving. He wasn't just interrogating me, he was measuring me. He saw the ghost behind the mother, the lethality behind the mask. He won't stop, I said, the PTSD beginning to claw at the edges of my mind. Lencho is a ghost. He doesn't just kill, he erases. He'll come for the girls. Let him, Daquan said. His grip on my neck tightened just a fraction. Not enough to hurt, but enough to anchor me. He has never faced the Iron Shadow. And he certainly hasn't faced a woman like you when she has nothing left to lose. He turned away, tapping a command into the wall panel. The monitors flickered, switching to a high-altitude view of a rugged, fog-shrouded island in the middle of the dark sea. The penthouse is compromised, he stated, his tone suddenly clipped and professional. We leave in 10 minutes. My private chopper is on the roof. We are going to the Black Cellar, my fortress on the coast. It is off-grid, underground, and guarded by men who don't know the meaning of the word traitor. I looked at the monitors, then back at him. And my daughters? Daquan paused at the door, the blue light of the servers reflecting in his eyes. They are already being moved. From this moment on, Fana Porter, you are not my employee. You are my internal security strategist. You will fix my flaws, and in return, I will make sure Lencho never sees the sun again. He held out his hand. It wasn't an invitation. It was a contract signed in shadows. Pack what you need. We move now. The roar of the helicopter rotors was a physical weight, a rhythmic thumping that vibrated through the marrow of my bones. Outside the reinforced windows, the world was nothing but a chaotic expanse of ink-black sea and white-capped waves. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of expensive leather, jet fuel, and the comforting milky scent of my daughters. Saba and Mizan were strapped into a single oversized seat, their small hands locked together in their secret twin grip. To them, this wasn't an escape from a high-tech assassin. It was an adventure. Big Bird is loud. Mama, Saba shouted over the hum, her eyes wide as she watched the sea spray hit the glass. Mizan just watched Daquan. He was sitting directly across from us, his long legs crossed, a tablet in his lap. He didn't look at the screens. He looked at me, his gaze steady and unreadable, as if he were trying to map the terrain of my mind. The chopper tilted sharply, and then I saw it. The Black Cellar. It wasn't a house. It was a scar on the cliffside. A brutalist monolith of reinforced concrete and dark steel, built directly into the jagged rock of a private island. It looked like a tomb, or a throne. As the wheels touched down on the reinforced pad, the sudden silence was jarring. The side doors slid open, and the salt-heavy air of the East Sea rushed in, biting and cold. Daquan stood, offering no hand to help, only a silent nod for me to follow. I scooped Mizan onto my hip while Saba grabbed my hand, and we stepped out onto the concrete. Immediately, my internal audit triggered. I looked at the perimeter. You're using Mark 7 seismic sensors, I said. My voice raised against the wind as we walked toward the heavy blast doors. They're reliable, but the salt air here will corrode the base plate within 6 months. It causes a 2-second lag in the feedback loop. 2 seconds is a lifetime. Daquan stopped at the threshold, his coat snapping in the wind. He looked at the sensors, then back at me, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. Most people just say thank you for saving my life, Fauna. You look for rust. Rust is how people die, I countered. We entered the fortress. The interior was a stark contrast to the penthouse's warmth. The walls were polished basalt, the floors a seamless poured resin that muffled our footsteps. The air was sterile, filtered through medical-grade scrubbers, and the hum of the massive underwater servers below us felt like a low-grade fever in the air. Daquan led us through a series of pressurized doors to a wing that felt slightly more human. He stopped at a heavy oak door. Your quarters, he stated. The twins are in the connecting suite. There is no exterior glass. You are 30 feet behind solid rock here. I walked in, my eyes immediately darting to the corners. No cameras. That was a choice. Then I saw it. A subtle seam in the basalt wall near the vanity. I walked over and pressed the panel. It slid back to reveal a high-tech workstation and a reinforced steel door. That leads to my command center, Daquan said, standing in the doorway. I don't believe in locks between partners. If you're going to be my strategist, you need to be able to reach me when the world starts to burn. I didn't answer. I sat down at the workstation. My fingers ached for the keys. I needed to see the data. I needed to know if we had truly outrun the monster. Daquan disappeared for a moment and returned with a heavy crystal glass and a steaming ceramic mug. He set the coffee in front of me and the whiskey on his side of the desk. "Why didn't you go to them?" he asked abruptly. His voice was softer now, stripped of the boss's persona. "The authorities. A woman with your skills could have been put in witness protection. You didn't have to live under a desk." I took a sip of the coffee. Black, bitter, and perfect. I looked at the reflection of the twins playing on the rug in the other room through the open door. "Lencho didn't just work for the government, Daquan," I said, the memory of the cold metallic click of a badge hitting my kitchen table flashing through my mind. "He was the government. He was the lead architect of the very surveillance state that would have been protecting me. Every camera in the city was his eye. Every police report was his morning reading. You don't hide from the sun by standing in a spotlight." Daquan leaned against the doorframe, his expression darkening. He understood. In his world, power was the only law. I turned back to the monitors, my fingers flying across the keys. I bypassed the cellar's primary firewall using a back door I'd mapped out mentally during the flight. I began a deep packet inspection of the island's outgoing pings. 5 minutes in, my blood turned to ice. "What is it?" Daquan was at my shoulder instantly, his hand resting on the back of my chair. I pointed to a microscopic blip on the screen, a ghost signal, a sub-frequency burst that was hidden inside the white noise of the island's weather station. "It's a handshake protocol," I whispered, my heart hammering. "It's not trying to get in, it's waiting for us to arrive." Lencho didn't find a trace, Daquan. He planted one. He knew about the black cellar before we even took off from the penthouse. He let us come here because he wanted us in a cage he recognized. The silence in the room became absolute. The high-tech noir dream of the fortress suddenly felt like a beautifully designed trap. I looked up at Daquan. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't quite fear, but a cold, lethal recognition. He realized the man we were fighting wasn't a criminal. He was a mirror. "You think this place is a fortress," I said, my voice steady despite the terror. "To Lencho, it's just a bigger puzzle. He's already started solving it. If we're going to survive the night, I don't just need a desk. I need total access to your mainframe. Every satellite, every sensor, every kill switch." Daquan didn't hesitate. He reached into his inner vest pocket and pulled out a matte black card with a gold leaf inlay. He laid it on the desk between us. "The master key," he said. "The cellar is yours, Fauna. Turn it into a weapon." The blue light of the mainframe monitors was the only thing keeping the shadows at bay. It was 3 a.m., and the black cellar hummed with a low, predatory energy. My fingers felt like lead, but I couldn't stop. I was tracing the handshake Lencho had left behind, trying to find the source of the ping. Every time I thought I had a lock on his location, the signal fragmented like mercury on glass. I didn't hear him approach. In this fortress, Lee Daquan was the ghost. I only knew he was there when the scent of sandalwood and old whiskey cut through the sterile, recycled air of the command center. "The data won't change if you stare at it for another hour, Fauna," he said. His voice was a low vibration in the quiet room. I didn't look up. If I sleep, he moves. If he moves, we lose the trail. If you don't sleep, your reflexes will slow. And in the black cellar, slow means dead. He reached down, his hand covering mine on the mouse. His skin was warm, a startling contrast to the cold plastic. "Come with me. You've been in the digital world too long. You need to reconnect with the physical." I followed him out of the command center. We moved through the basalt corridors, descending deeper into the heart of the cliffside. The air grew heavier, smelling of cold stone and machine oil. We reached a heavy, reinforced door that hissed open to reveal a sprawling, high-tech training hall. One side was a firing range with tactical targets. The other was a matted floor for hand-to-hand combat. Daquan walked to a recessed wall cabinet and pulled out a sleek, matte black K5 pistol. He checked the chamber with a practiced metallic click and held it out to me. "Lencho is military," he stated, his eyes boring into mine. If he breaches the perimeter, your keyboard won't save you. Show me how you hold a life in your hands. I took the weapon. The weight was familiar, a cold comfort I hadn't felt in years. I stepped up to the line, feet shoulder-width apart, and took aim at a silhouette 30 feet away. I fired 3 shots. Thud. 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 All 3 hit the chest, but they were scattered. Daquan stepped behind me. I felt the heat of his chest against my back, his presence wrapping around me like a shroud. He reached around, his large hands engulfing mine on the grip of the pistol. You're fighting the recoil, he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. Don't fight it. Absorb it. Breathe with the weapon, Fauna. In. Out. I followed his rhythm. The world narrowed down to the sight, the target, and the intoxicating heat of the man holding me steady. My heart hammered, but not from fear. It was a primal electric tension. I squeezed the trigger. The bullet found the dead center of the target's throat. Better, he murmured, but he didn't pull away. His grip tightened slightly on my hands. Where did you learn to shoot like that? That wasn't a corporate security course. I learned it in a basement in Virginia, I said, my voice tight. Lencho didn't just want a wife, he wanted a partner in arms. He taught me everything he knew so I could guard his back. He didn't realize I'd eventually use those skills to run from him. I turned in his arms, the barrel of the gun safely pointed down, but our faces were inches apart. The erotic charge in the room was thick enough to choke on. Mizan calls you the king, I whispered. She thinks you're the hero from the stories I told them. The warrior king who keeps the monsters away. Daquan's eyes searched mine, looking for the lie. And what do you think, Fana? Am I the king? Or just another monster who happens to be standing in your corner? The jury is still out, I said, a small defiant smile tugging at my lips. I set the gun on the table and moved toward the sparring mats. You've seen me shoot. Now let's see if the Iron Shadow is as fast as they say. He shed his suit jacket, tossing it onto a chair. Beneath, his white shirt was taut across his shoulders, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faint, silvery scars. We circled each other on the mats. He moved with a heavy, crushing power, but I was built for evasion. He lunged, his hand reaching for my throat. I dropped low, sweeping my leg in a wide arc that he easily jumped. I came up fast, driving my palm toward his chin, but he caught my wrist, twisting it behind my back and pulling me flush against his chest. You're fast, he barked, a predatory light in his eyes. But you're small. I can crush you. Only if you catch me, I hissed. I used his own leverage to flip my body, my boots catching the mat as I twisted out of his grip. In the same motion, I reached for the training knife tucked into the waistband of my leggings. It was a rubber blade, but in the dark it was enough. He moved to pin me against the wall, his weight intended to end the match. I didn't fight the weight. I slid down, my back scraping the concrete, and as he followed me into the clinch, I brought the rubber blade up, pressing the blunt tip firmly against his floating rib. We stayed like that, frozen. He had my wrists pinned above my head, his body weight holding me motionless, but my blade was at his heart. The morning light began to bleed through the high, reinforced slits in the training hall's ceiling. The sound of soft, rhythmic clicking and melodic whispers drifted down from the observation deck. Daquan looked up, distracted. Above us, Saba and Mizan were sitting on the stairs, watching us. They weren't crying. They weren't scared. They were talking in that strange, rapid-fire twin language, cryptophasia. It sounded like a mix of clicks and bird calls. Mizan pointed toward the north corner of the hall, then back at the main gate, her small fingers tracing a line in the air. What are they doing? Daquan asked, his voice full of genuine confusion. They're mapping, I said, my breath coming in ragged gasps. They aren't just playing. They're pointing out the camera blind spots. They've realized the guards don't look up when they pass the third pillar. They've been doing it since they could crawl. Daquan looked back at the twins, then down at me, The realization that even my children were tactical assets seemed to shift something deep inside him. He didn't see them as burdens anymore. He saw them as his kin. He looked back at the rubber knife at his ribs and then into my eyes. His gaze was dark, hungry, and entirely focused. He leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear. "You're the most dangerous thing in this fortress, Vanna Porter," he whispered, his voice sending a shiver of pure fire down my spine. "And I think I'm addicted to it." He didn't let me go. He stayed there, pinned against me in the morning light, while my daughters watched from above, their secret language weaving a new dynasty out of the shadows. But the peace of the morning was short-lived. By nightfall, the fog didn't roll in, it crawled. It was a thick, unnatural shroud that swallowed the moon and turned the black cellar's exterior floodlights into useless, milky blurs. I sat in the command center, the glow of the monitors reflected in my pupils, watching the perimeter feed. The sensors I'd warned Daquan about, the ones with the salt-corroded base plates, began to flicker. On the thermal map, a sector near the sea caves didn't just go dark. It smoothed out. Someone was using a signal phase shifter to mirror the background noise of the ocean. To an untrained eye, it looked like a glitch. To me, it looked like Lencho's signature. "They're here," I whispered into the comms. My voice was a ghost of a sound, but I knew Daquan heard it in the barracks. "Status?" His voice crackled back, low and dangerously calm. "4 ghosts. Sea cave entry. They've bypassed the Mark 7s by exploiting the lag. They're inside the secondary ventilation shafts now." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Daquan, they aren't coming for you. They're headed for the residential wing. Hold the line, Fauna. I'm moving." I didn't wait. I bolted from the command center, my boots silent on the resin floors, and slipped into the safe room where Saba and Mizan were supposed to be sleeping. They weren't. They were sitting up in their beds, their heads tilted in perfect synchronization toward the ceiling. Click-clack. Shh-tuck. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed from the vents. The twins looked at me, their eyes wide. Mizan pointed upward. "The spiders are in the walls, Mama," she whispered. The spiders were Lencho's elite extraction team. I didn't have a rifle, and I didn't have time to wait for Daquan's guards to navigate the labyrinthine corridors. I moved to the secondary terminal inside the safe room, a small, recessed panel I'd spent the last 6 hours slaving over. I didn't just have access to the cameras, I had access to the life support. I saw them on a hidden pinhole camera. 4 men in matte black tactical gear, moving with the terrifying fluidness of shadows. They were in the north corridor, just 20 feet from our door. They were stepping into the slip zone I'd prepared. I tapped a sequence into the panel. "Cleaning time," I hissed. High-pressure nozzles, designed for automated industrial sterilization, hissed to life in the ceiling of the north corridor. Instead of a fine mist, I released a concentrated alkaline-based stripping agent, the kind of stuff that eats through wax and skin with equal hunger. Within seconds, the floor was a frictionless lake of caustic chemicals. I watched on the monitor as the lead intruder's foot slipped. He went down hard, his tactical helmet clattering against the stone. As he tried to push himself up, the alkaline mist hit his visor, clouding the optics and beginning to hiss as it reacted with the specialized coating. They were blinded, sliding, and trapped in a hallway turned into a chemical furnace. But I'd missed one. The vent cover in the safe room exploded downward. A man dropped from the ceiling, landing with a heavy, muffled thud between me and the twins. He was masked, a thermal imaging monocle glowing a demonic red over his right eye. I didn't scream. Screaming is for victims. I grabbed a heavy, pressurized canister of fire-suppressant foam from the wall and lunged. He raised a silenced submachine gun, but I was already inside his guard. I slammed the base of the canister into his throat, the sound of cartilage crunching sickeningly loud in the small room. He staggered back, his finger twitching on the trigger. A burst of bullets chewed into the basalt wall, inches from where I stood. I didn't give him a second chance. I triggered the canister, burying his face and chest in a mountain of suffocating chemical foam. He thrashed, blinded and unable to breathe. I grabbed the combat knife from his own tactical vest and, with a precision I hadn't used in years, drove it into the gap between his helmet and his shoulder armor. He slumped. The only sound in the room was the heavy, ragged sound of my own breathing and the soft drip-drip of the foam hitting the floor. I turned to the twins. They were huddled together, watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. They didn't look horrified. They looked awestruck. To them, the stories were coming true. The queen was protecting the hive. The door to the safe room hissed open. Daquan burst in, his K5 raised, his men fanning out behind him. He stopped dead. He looked at the body on the floor, the foam, the knife in my hand, and the blood splattered across my white shirt. He looked at the twins, then back at me. He didn't see a victim. He saw a predator who had just finished a meal. The others? I asked, my voice cold and hollow. Neutralized in the hallway, Daquan said, his eyes never leaving mine. Your cleaning agent made it easy for us to pick them off. They couldn't stand, let alone aim. He walked toward me, stepping over the dead man. He didn't look at the corpse. He reached into the man's tactical pouch and pulled out a small vibrating disc. A localized comms relay. Daquan pressed a button, and a voice filled the room. It was a voice that lived in the darkest corners of my nightmares. It was smooth, educated, and utterly devoid of mercy. You can't hide in a hole, Fauna, Lencho's voice whispered through the speaker, sounding as if he were standing right behind me. I built the hole. I know the air you breathe. I know the frequency of your heart. I'm coming to take back what's mine. Tell the Korean boy to enjoy the view while he still has eyes. The message ended with a sharp digital burst. The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt the old panic trying to rise, the feeling of Lencho's invisible hand tightening around my throat. I looked at my daughters, and for a second, the black cellar felt like a grave. Daquan reached out. His gloved hand was warm as he wiped a stray drop of blood from my cheek. His touch was an anchor, pulling me back from the brink of the PTSD spiral. He thinks he knows the whole, Daquan said, his voice a low, lethal promise. He looked at the carnage I had caused, the efficiency of my defense, and the fire returning to my eyes. He realized then that I wasn't just an asset to be guarded. I was a weapon to be wielded. He's wrong, Daquan continued, his thumb lingering on my jaw. He hasn't met the woman you've become, and he hasn't met the man who's going to help you kill him. He looked at his second in command. Prep the long-range strike team. We aren't waiting for him to come back. Tomorrow, we hunt him. I gripped the master keycard in my pocket. The warrior king was standing in front of me, but as I looked at the blood on my hands, I realized I didn't need a savior. I needed an accomplice. Not tomorrow, I said, looking into Daquan's obsidian eyes. Now. The transition from the rugged concrete of the black cellar to the suffocating opulence of soul felt like a fever dream. We were back in the belly of the beast, but this time, I wasn't carrying a mop. I stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror in the dressing room of our temporary safe house, staring at a woman I barely recognized. The last time I'd been in a luxury hotel, I was wearing a gray polyester blend with Porter cleaning services stitched over my heart, smelling of bleach and invisibility. Now I was sliding into a custom-tailored black power suit. The silk was heavy, cold, and felt like liquid armor. I didn't just dress. I calibrated. I strapped a ceramic blade to the inside of my thigh, non-detectable by standard magnetism, and tucked a micro-receiver into my ear canal. I looked at my hands. They were the same hands that had scrubbed Daquan's floors, but as I adjusted the sharp, notched lapels of the blazer, I realized the janitor was dead. This suit wasn't fashion. It was a psychological weapon designed to tell every man in that room that I was the one who controlled the light they stood in. Daquan appeared in the doorway. He didn't speak. He just watched me, his obsidian eyes tracking the way I checked the hidden pockets of the suit. He walked over, his reflection looming behind mine, and handed me a heavy, matte black watch. It's a localized EMP burst, he whispered, his voice a low vibration against my hair. If things go south, you have 3 seconds of total darkness. Use them. Use them. We descended into the bowels of the Grand Shilla Hotel. The bunker was a masterpiece of expensive paranoia, lead-lined walls and signal jamming paint. When we entered, the air was thick with a scent of aged tobacco and the sour, heavy energy of men who had held power for too long. 4 men sat at the obsidian table. They were the kings of Seoul's underbelly, and they didn't look up when we entered. But when Daquan pulled out the chair to his right, the seat reserved for the consigliere, and I sat down, the silence became a physical weight. Chairman Park, a man whose face was a map of deep-set wrinkles and old scars, let a plume of blue smoke drift from his lips. He leaned forward, his heavy gold rings clinking against the table. Daquan, he rasped, his eyes flicking to me with a mixture of confusion and disdain. We agreed on a neutral council. We did not agree to you bringing your domestic staff to a table where blood is discussed. The other bosses chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I didn't flush. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, mirroring Park's posture. Chairman Park, I said, my voice cutting through the smoke like a laser. You've spent $40 million on this bunker. You've installed Israeli-grade jammers and thought you were safe. But you're leaking. Park narrowed his eyes. Be careful, girl. Your jammers are high frequency, I continued, my tone clinical and cold. But Lencho doesn't need a signal to get out. He's using the EMF leakage from the very tablets you're using to check your stock prices. Every time a circuit fires in this room, it creates a microscopic electromagnetic pulse. He has a vibration-sensing laser aimed at the glass of that water pitcher on the table. He isn't listening to your voices, he's reconstructing the audio from the ripples in the water. This isn't a bunker, Chairman. It's a microphone. I reached out, took a silver spoon from the tray, and dropped it into the pitcher. The ripples shattered. There, I said. I just blinded him for 10 seconds. If you want the next 10 minutes, you'll start listening. The laughter died instantly. Park looked at the water pitcher as if it were a live grenade. Daquan didn't say a word, but I could feel the radiation of his pride. It wasn't the shallow ego of a man with a trophy. It was the deep, lethal respect of a general realizing his second in command was more dangerous than he was. I tapped a command into my watch, and a holographic map shimmered into existence above the obsidian table. It was a map of a global nervous system, red lines pulsing across continents, connecting government agencies to black market data havens. Lencho isn't a rival boss, I stated, pointing to the nexus of the web. He is a predator who builds the cages you live in. He has already compromised your bank accounts and your shipment routes. He doesn't want your territory. He wants your data. Because in his world, if you control the information, you don't need the guns. I watched them. I saw the moment the ego left the room, replaced by a cold, hollow fear. I showed them the pings, the same handshake protocol I'd found at the Black Cellar, embedded in their own personal networks. I wasn't selling a war. I was showing them the funeral they were already attending. Throughout it all, I felt Daquan's gaze on me. It was a look of absolute, terrifying intellectual respect. It was more intimate than a touch, a bond forged in the fires of a shared cold genius. The table is yours to advise, Park said, his voice shaking as he stood and bowed. Not to Daquan, but to me. Tell us what we need to do. As we left the bunker, the adrenaline was a hum in my teeth. We moved toward the private elevators, the doors sliding shut with a soft hiss. The moment we were alone, the professional mask slipped. Daquan turned to me, his back to the mirrored wall. He didn't say a word. He grabbed the lapels of my blazer and pulled me into the corner, his body pinning mine against the cold glass. His breath was hot against my neck, his scent of sandalwood and victory overwhelming. They came here to judge me for keeping you, he whispered, his voice a low, jagged rumble. They left wondering if they can survive without you. The elevator didn't stop at the lobby. It kept descending, deeper into the sub-basement. My heart hammered against my ribs, matching the downward pull of the lift. The council is aligned, Daquan murmured, his lips brushing the shell of my ear as the floor numbers turned to a glowing G2. But they are slow. We are not. The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open to the underground garage. The air here was cold and smelled of high-octane fuel and wet concrete. Waiting for us was a fleet of 3 matte black SUVs, their engines idling with a low, predatory growl. 20 men in full tactical gear stood at attention, their weapons held across their chests. Daquan stepped out, his hand sliding down to grip mine, his fingers interlaced with mine as if we were a single entity. "He thinks he knows the whole," Daquan said, looking toward the lead vehicle. "Now we show him what happens when the shadows hunt the light." I squeezed his hand, the weight of the ceramic knife and the digital key to the city both heavy in my mind. The hunt didn't start tomorrow. It was happening now. The streetlights of Seoul blurred into long neon streaks against the SUV's armored glass. We were a predatory pack. 3 matte black beasts tearing through the midnight traffic toward a warehouse district by the docks. My tablet was a glow of green and blue data, tracking the signal we thought was Lencho's heartbeat. Daquan sat beside me, his hand resting on his knee, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He was the picture of calm, but I could feel the electricity coming off him. We were the hunters now. We were closing in. Then, the data shivered. A single line of code scrolled across my screen, followed by a repetitive, rhythmic pulse. My breath hitched. I tapped the screen, bypass after bypass, diving deep into the sublayers of the Black Cellar's mainframe. The handshake from the island wasn't a trace. It was a countdown. "Daquan, stop the car," I whispered. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "We're 2 minutes out, Fauna. Stay focused." "No," I barked, my fingers flying across the glass. "The signal, the warehouse is an echo. It's a digital mirror. It's looping back from the island. The Trojan horse didn't just open a door, it's a sleeper virus. It's executing a total system purge." I pulled up the live feed of the Black Cellar. The safe room cameras flickered. Static, then black. My heart didn't just race, it stopped. The primal icy claws of a mother's terror gripped my throat, cutting off my air. Saba, Mizan. They were in that room. They're inside. I choked out. "Daquan, the back doors are open. The island's defense grid is being dismantled from the inside." "How?" Daquan's voice was ice, but his hand tightened on his knee until his knuckles turned white. "My encryption is unbreakable." "It wasn't broken," I said, staring at the override signature currently bleeding through the firewall. "It was invited in. The authorization code. It belongs to Chairman Park. The bow. The respect. The submission at the table of bosses. It wasn't a surrender, it was a distraction. Park wasn't just a skeptic. He was the bridge Lencho used to cross our moats. He had traded Daquan's head for his own survival. Driver. U-turn. Now." Daquan roared. The tires screamed against the asphalt, a high-pitched wail of protest as the SUV swung in a violent tactical arc. My body was thrown against the door, the tablet nearly slipping from my hands. We weren't hunting anymore. We were losing everything. "Get the pilots on the line," Daquan commanded into his comms, his face a mask of terrifying, frozen rage. "If that chopper isn't blades up by the time we hit the roof, I'll kill them myself." The SUV tore back toward the city center, weaving through traffic with a suicidal disregard for safety. I didn't look at the road. I was in a dogfight in the digital ether. I tried to lock the safe room doors, but the virus kept spitting my commands back at me. "Access denied. Access denied. Talk to me, Fauna." Daquan shouted over the roar of the engine. "I can't lock the doors." I screamed back, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. "Park's code has administrative priority. I'm locked out of the primary grid." I looked at the schematics of the Black Cellar. If I couldn't lock them out, I had to make the environment unlivable. I bypassed the security locks and slaved the environmental controls to my tablet. If I can't stop them, I'll confuse them, I hissed. I triggered the fire suppression system in the residential wing. On my screen, I saw the pressure gauges spike. Thousands of gallons of fire-retardant foam and freezing carbon dioxide would be flooding the corridors, turning the air into an opaque, suffocating fog. I triggered the emergency sirens, not the low-frequency ones, but the high-decibel sonic denial blasts designed to disorient intruders. Do it, Daquan growled. The SUV swerved into the private entrance of the Grand Shilla, tires smoking as we hit the ramp. We didn't wait for the vehicle to fully stop. The doors flew open, and we were running straight for the express elevator to the helipad. The ascent felt like an eternity. The blue light of the tablet reflected in my eyes, which were wide and wild with panic. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. I was fighting Lencho across miles of ocean, two ghosts battling for the lives of two little girls. "I've got a flicker," I yelled as the elevator chimed. We burst onto the roof. The wind was a hurricane, the chopper's rotors already a blurring halo of gray. The smell of jet fuel and hot asphalt filled my lungs. As we sprinted toward the open bay door, I looked down at the tablet one last time. The feed for the twins' room flickered to life for one agonizing second. The room was a wreck. The lavender-scented quilts were tossed aside. The Ford under the desk was smashed. Standing in the center of the frame was a man in matte black tactical gear. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at the floor. In his gloved hand, he held Miss Anne's tattered, blue-edged security blanket. He raised it to his face, as if inhaling the scent of my child. The screen went black. Permanent. I hit the floor of the chopper, the metal cold against my palms. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. The image of that man holding the blanket was burned into my retinas, a brand of pure, unadulterated failure. Daquan pulled the headset on. His eyes locked onto the tablet screen that now showed nothing but static. He reached over, his hand gripping my shoulder with a force that should have hurt, but I felt nothing. I was already dead inside. He leaned in close, his voice cutting through the roar of the engines as the chopper lifted off, tilting precariously toward the dark sea. "Park is a dead man," Daquan whispered, his obsidian eyes glowing with a light that promised a suffering beyond words. "But Lencho is mine." The chopper surged forward, a black shadow screaming into the fog, chasing a ghost that had finally stepped into the light. The helicopter leaned into a hard bank, the air inside the cabin screaming with a roar of the rotors and the frantic prep of men checking their optics. Below us, the black cellar was a jagged tooth of shadow rising out of a churning white-capped sea. No lights, no beacons, just a void where my life used to be. Daquan stood by the open bay door, the wind whipping his hair into a dark frenzy. He gripped a fast rope, his jaw set in a line of frozen granite. "The roof is a trap," I said, grabbing his arm. My voice was thin against the gale, but the urgency in it stopped him. "Lencho knows your tactical manual, Daquan. He's got snipers on the helipad and claymores on the stairwells. If you drop there, you're landing in a blender." He looked at the dark roof, then at me. "I don't have another way in, Fauna. Every second we wait, he moves them closer to the water." "I do," I said, pulling a waterproof tactical pack over my shoulders. "The sea caves. The Mark 7 sensors have that 2-second lag I told you about. In this swell, the spray will mask my thermal signature. I can climb the north face and enter through the secondary filtration vent. It's a suicide mission," he growled. "No, it's a cleaning job," I countered, my eyes locking onto his. "You draw the fire, hit the roof hard, make enough noise to wake the dead. I'll be the ghost in the basement." He stared at me for a heartbeat that felt like an hour. Then, he grabbed the back of my neck and pulled my forehead to his. "Find them, Ghost. I'll make sure they're too busy looking up to see you coming." I didn't wait for a goodbye. I dived. The impact with the East Sea was a physical assault. The water was ice cold, a black weight that tried to pull the air from my lungs. I surfaced, gasping, the salt stinging my eyes and the bitter tang of brine filling my mouth. The roar of the helicopter above was a rhythmic thunder, drawing the first sparks of muzzle flashes from the fortress roof. Daquan had started his war. I swam toward the jagged teeth of the north cliff, my movements timed to the heave of the swells. 1,000, 1,000. Every 2 seconds, the sensors reset their sweep. I moved during the blind pulse, my fingers clawing into the wet, barnacle-crusted rock. The weight of my soaked suit was a leaden shroud, but the adrenaline was a hot wire in my veins. I reached the filtration vent, a narrow, rusted grate 30 feet above the waterline. I didn't use a saw. I used a pressurized canister of acidic grout dissolver I'd tucked into my hip pouch. The metal hissed and bubbled, the structural integrity failing just enough for me to kick the grate inward. I tumbled into the dark. Inside, the black cellar was a tomb of basalt and silence. The power was dead. But I didn't need light. I knew these hallways by the vibration of the air. I stripped off my soaked blazer, leaving me in a black tactical tank top, my skin slick with salt and sweat. Above me, the building shuddered. A muffled explosion rocked the foundations, Daquan hitting the roof. I moved through the sublevel toward the chemical storage. I didn't have a rifle, but I had the building's own lungs. I found the industrial canisters of bleach and ammonia I'd noted during my first audit. I cracked the valves, venting them into the localized vac system of the lower levels. A thick, white, choking fog began to spill into the corridors, a makeshift smoke screen that would blind anyone without a closed-circuit respirator. I pulled my own mask over my face, the rubber seal biting into my skin. I reached the residential wing, my heart hammering. The air here was thick with the chemical fog, but through the silence, I heard it. Click, click, click. Shh. It was faint, rhythmic, and coming from the maintenance vents near the ceiling. It wasn't the sound of captives, it was a signal. My daughters weren't in the safe room. They had moved into the fortress within the fortress, the ventilation network they had mapped out during their training sessions. Saba? Mizan? I whispered, my voice muffled by the mask. Click, click. The sound moved toward the command center. They were leading me. They were acting as my forward scouts in the dark. I followed the sound, my ceramic knife drawn. The closer I got to the command center, the louder the sounds of the battle above became, the frantic chatter of submachine guns and the heavy thump of grenades. The clock was ticking. If Daquan's men breached the inner sanctum, the scorch earth protocols might trigger. I reached the command center's reinforced doors. They were standing open, a final insult to the security I'd tried to build. Inside, the emergency red lights flickered, casting long bloody shadows across the consoles. Chairman Park sat in the center of the room, a glass of Daquan's vintage whiskey in his hand. He was watching the thermal feeds of the roof battle, a smug, oily smile on his face. He didn't see me. He was too busy enjoying the destruction of a dynasty. I didn't give him a speech. I didn't give him a chance to beg. I moved like a shadow across the resin floor, and before he could even set the glass down, I had the ceramic blade pressed against the soft tissue of his throat. The override code. Park. I hissed, my voice a jagged edge. Give me back my grid. He gasped, the glass shattering on the floor. Fauna. Wait. Lencho, he promised. I pressed the blade deeper, a thin line of red appearing on his collar. Lencho isn't here. I am. Give me the code, or I'll find out how long it takes for a traitor to bleed out in the dark. His hands shook as he typed a sequence into the master console. The monitors flickered, the primary grid returning to life. I saw the twins on a sub-feed. They were huddled in a junction box directly above the command center. Safe. For now. I slammed the butt of my knife into Park's temple, dropping him like a sack of stones. I didn't care if he woke up. I turned toward the vent to call for the girls, but the air in the room suddenly changed. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. A slow, rhythmic clapping echoed from the darkened hallway behind the server racks. Exemplary work, Vanna. Truly, a voice said. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't a digital whisper. It was him. Lencho stepped into the red light, his tall military frame silhouetted against the flickering screens. He held a detonator in one hand and a suppressed pistol in the other. He looked exactly as he did in my nightmares, but older, his eyes harder than the basalt walls. "You always were too smart for your own good," he said, his voice a calm paternal caress that made my skin crawl. "Drop the tablet and step away from the console. Or the girls don't just leave the building, they go into the sea with the rest of this rock." I looked at the monitor. I saw the twins' faces. Then I looked at Lencho. The warrior king was on the roof, but the ghost was in the room. "You built the hole, Lencho," I said, my grip tightening on the knife. "But I'm the one who cleaned it." The red emergency lights pulsed like a dying heart, casting long rhythmic shadows across the command center. Lencho stood there, the matte black barrel of his pistol leveled at my chest, his finger resting casually on a detonator that could turn this entire fortress into a sea grave. He looked exactly as he did the night I ran, composed, professional, and terrifyingly familiar. "You look tired, Nora," he said, using the name he'd given me, the name that felt like a chokehold. "This life doesn't suit you. Scrubbing floors for a Korean thug, living in a hole in the ground. It's beneath you. Come home, honey. I've already cleared a path. We can tell the girls it was all just a bad dream." His voice was a smooth paternal caress, the kind of tone he used right before he'd isolate me or remind me that without him, I was nothing. I felt the old cold dread trying to settle in my marrow, the phantom weight of the leash he'd kept me on for years. "My name is Fana," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. I gripped the ceramic knife behind my leg, my thumb tracing the hilt. "And this hole is a fortress you couldn't break without a traitor's help. You're not